Good morning, everyone. My name is Kathy Cleveland Bull, and I'm on the board of the C.G. Jung Association of Central Ohio, better known to friends as YACO. And I'm joined today by Dr. Richard Sweeney, better known as Dick, to all of us in our Central Ohio Jungian community. And at YACO, we talked about the need to provide some support to our larger community since I've heard the word unprecedented a million times in the last 3 weeks, and we really are walking into unknown territory. And in some ways, that's what Jungians were created for, helping people walk through unknown territory in the second half of life and in anything that comes up as we face midlife challenges and so forth. So we thought we would do a short video call today with Dick and with others maybe down the road to just get a sense of what valuable insights they can provide to us in the collective community and also personally, like for myself, how do I navigate this? So I guess the two questions that I'm going to be posing to Dick today are what the heck is going on and what do I do about it? So let me give you just a brief introduction to Dick for those of you who don't know him. He is a Jungian analyst and licensed professional clinical counselor in private practice in Columbus, Ohio, as well as Cincinnati. He also has a PhD in religion and psychology and religion from UC Berkeley. And he has a diploma in analytical psychology from the C.G. Jung Institute in Zurich, Switzerland, and is on the international faculty there. But to us, he is Dick, and he is, he'll not appreciate me saying this, but really, we've all come to see him as our wisdom guide, which is why he's number one on my list to ask to join me today to just talk a little bit about what is happening. So to set the stage, Dick, I thought I would share something that I'm going through, and maybe others, maybe the viewers and listeners are also going through it. I feel like on the one hand, I've been preparing for decades for just this moment in time, all the inner work, the psycho-spiritual development, my community. I mean, I feel like we've been preparing ourselves for this for a long, long time. And on the other hand, this might be the tension of the opposites. On the other hand, in some ways, I feel like completely disrupted and watching myself sort of fall back into old habit patterns that I thought I had wrestled to the ground long ago. And so I don't know if others are walking through this, but I do know from watching, posts on Facebook and other social media and seeing what's in the news, people are feeling incredibly disoriented, feeling a sense of uncertainty, off balance, groundless, uncertain, all those things, and of course, anxiety and depression. So I guess my first question to you would be, how can depth psychology or Jungian psychology in particular help us understand and come to terms with what's happening right now with not only, there's a pandemic, but there's also the economic uncertainty that people are facing. So how do we get our head around and our hearts around this current situation?
Mm-hmm. Well, of course, and I guess that is the questioning with. I think, though, that trying to find a certain meaning, a greater sense of meaning in what all of us are encountering and confronting these days, not just but throughout the country and worldwide. I think depth psychology and Jungian thought can help us find our way to get a larger sense of what is the meaning of this. Because I think generally if we can find meaning in what we're experiencing, it makes it more possible to negotiate it, to navigate it. And maybe to just make some suggestions about that or thoughts about that. My mind took me to a quote of Jung's very late in life when he was 83, about a year and a half before he died. And it's in a letter that he wrote to a person. And they were talking about the ultimate meaning of life and the nature of God. And he made this kind of striking statement. I want to make sure I have it correct, so I'll read it to you. I remember it pretty well. To this day, God is the name by which I designate all things which cross my willful path, sometimes violently and recklessly, all things which then upset my subjective views and intentions and change the course of my life for better or worse.
Wow.
So in that statement where he talks about God as a name he uses to designate this experience of things coming upon us that we weren't expecting, maybe not certainly wanting, but really can't keep from encountering. And I think he suggests, even if it changes life seemingly for the better or maybe for the worse, he goes on in that letter to say, in every instance, it usually enlarges our consciousness. It's an experience that invites us to reflect upon life a little bit differently, to reflect upon what really is valuable and maybe not as valuable as we were thinking. It expands consciousness. So in that sense, it's always serving that. And I think he used the term God for whatever it is, this larger wisdom unfolding in our lives that keep ushering up greater consciousness and awareness, greater awareness of how we're connected to everything else. Sometimes that happens to us in ways we're not expecting and not really looking for. It brings to my mind a Protestant theologian by the name of James Loder. Many years ago, read a book that I'm very influenced by. Was called The Transforming Moment. He taught at Princeton Theological. In the book, he basically says a lot of what he says. He says most of the transforming moments in our lives come from disruptive experiences, things we were not expecting, and that very often we would have preferred to avoid.
Right.
But they come our way, and they seem to be the experiences that invite, to use the biblical term, metanoia, which is really the biblical term for consciousness or awareness. So I think if we look at what we're having to encounter now worldwide, it can maybe invite us into ways of reflecting and thinking and understanding. And I might just suggest one element of that, if I can go on and do
Yes,
that.
please. Yes.
Okay, to decide another central theme of Jungian psychology, which focuses on the search for wholeness, the awareness of connectedness with all of reality in our own individual lives. If we're living our life in a too one-sided way and the other value, sooner or later the psyche will produce a symptom of some kind. So like the person who's workaholic, at some point they encounter the symptom of burnout. Or let's say the person who is always trying to please other people, which I can relate to, and many of us can, at some point we find ourselves getting displeased with ourselves. And so there's a symptom that reveals to us there's something that's being overlooked, undervalued. And as I think of COVID-19, coronavirus, this worldwide pandemic, invites all of us to reflect upon what does this mean? What's true of the individual psyche is true of the world psyche, which Jung called the anima mundi, the soul of the world.
Yes.
What is it telling us about the world psyche, our life together? As I reflect on it, there's not one answer to that, of course, but it occurs to me perhaps that, at a time in history where there's been a lot of emphasis on neo-nationalism and isolationism, sectarianism among religions, Christianity, Islam, when there's this growing division and even a movement towards separation and, again, nationalism, lo and behold, we have a symptom that forcibly reminds us of how interconnected we actually all are. And of course, virus is something we can tangibly experience, but I think it reveals to us that all the ways we think and behave and act, all of those ways of being are always impacting one another locally, but also throughout the world. So, maybe what we're having to encounter is this painful awareness that we really all are interconnected, that all of our energies flow together, and that the only thing that really helps us is communication with one another, learning from one another, compassion for one another, helping out one another. And maybe that ultimately is what we need to come back to and rely on. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe there's some message being given to us from the depths of the world's psyche that is worth our reflecting upon and gives more meaning to wanting to suffer and endure.
Right, right.
So,
It's interesting. So much of what you said I can relate to, and I see people having glimpses of that awareness. Just the other day, I saw a very funny post on Facebook that said, the world is telling Mother Nature, they're having a conversation with Mother Nature, and they're saying, we can't possibly slow down in order to heal the planet. That we can't possibly slow down and slow down pollution and slow down our activity, and we need to do this, we have to do this. And then the meme says, Mother Nature says, hold my beer, like, I'm going to get on this. And sorry, but you know there's going to be a response, there's going to be some symptom, and this is it's interesting that it's a bug in the system, isn't it? That
yeah.
we have a bug in our system. There's a bug in our soup, and it's really not to make light of it because it is deadly. But there's something that's calling us to greater awareness. And on the other hand, Dick, what about the idea that, I do feel like you're absolutely right. There's something that's asking us to slow down and wake up. But what about the numbing out quality? It's too much. And so the numbing out quality of, I can't, people binge watching, Netflix and playing computer games, and they're not at work. And so a lot of time on their hands, and they're feeling bored and disconnected. So it's like there's both things happening at the same time. There's this heightened sense of community, and we see it all the time with, these, you just go on a walk and you see people talking and 6 feet apart, and that never really had conversations before. And the kindness and the generosity is just really, it opens your heart in so many ways. And then at the same time, there's a draw to numb out and dissociate from the pain and suffering that we're seeing. I don't know if you have reflection on that.
Yeah, well, those are certainly good comments. I think there's certainly a difference between obviously numbing out and trying to live consciously, even with a certain degree of fear and anxiety. Numbing out is trying to avoid the reality that we're facing and not look at it at all. Seems to me the other alternative is to live consciously, and that is to be informed about what it is we're dealing with, but not over-identifying with it. And Jung makes a great comment late in Memories, Dreams, and Reflection, where he says that fear, natural as it is, can create paralysis if we over-identify with the feared object, so that we're always need to focus on it, or we're desperately trying to deny it.
Right.
And of course, what he says, fear needs to be seen as an emotional reaction that's alerting us to something. But if we keep all things in context, we need to just continue living our life and continuing to value the things that we still value, connection and communication with people important to us, and maybe doing things that in the busyness of life we don't have time to do normally.
Right.
Somebody was telling me recently this past week that now he's finally taking the course, The Science of Well-Being. That was the most popular course taught at Yale University for a while, and it's free on Coursera.
I
And
noticed that. I'm ready to sign up
no,
myself.
well, there you go. So, it's an opportunity to do some of the things that one always wanted to do. Another man told me that he was returning to write some personal memoirs.
Yeah.
So, and that's not so much denying or numbing out, but saying,
Yeah.
okay, I'm informed about what we're dealing with. I'm doing what I can, but I don't want to focus all my attention on dwelling on that or constantly trying to deny it.
Mhm.
Let me put it in a larger perspective of life and do the other kinds of things that I find myself valuing now, seems to
Yeah.
me.
Yeah, I think that I wanted to get into fear and anxiety, but I remember a quote by Rilke that is like my favorite quote, and one of
Yeah,
my all-time favorite quotes. And I think it relates to what you just said about not getting concretizing the moment in time right now that feels that maybe somebody in a moment in time is feeling tremendous anxiety and paralyzed with that fear. And the quote in, I think it was from his book that's called Letters to a Young Poet. And the Rilke quote is, "Let
but
everything happen to you, beauty and terror. Just keep going. No feeling is final." And it reminds me of the story that Jung told about, you have to go through it. Do you remember the one I'm talking about? You just have to go through it. And no, just keep going. No feeling is final.
yeah, I know the story you're referring to. It was a story shared with Jung by one of his closest colleagues who had a client who was going through a very difficult time and had a dream in which she was in this dark pit filled with feces and excrement and was sinking down into it. And lo and behold, she sees a hand come down from on high, which she thinks, well, maybe that's the hand of Jung, or maybe it's the hand of God. And she feels all right, thinking this hand will now lift her up out of it. But the hand gently comes onto her forehead and pushes her slightly in and says, not out, but through.
True.
Not out, but through. Which I think is this message that we kind of have to go through what we're going through. So that means letting ourselves feel some anxiety, of course, feel
Mhm.
some concern, and to be enough aware of it that we do what we can do. We practice social distancing, we wash our hands, we make some preparations if we do get ill, but that we don't over identify with it so that we're constantly preoccupied that. We move through the myriad of different feelings we're having.
Mhm.
And at some point, we find ourselves to a great extent on the other side of it. And we don't know when that's going to come.
Right, right. So tell me a little bit more about the over-identification, um, with what? With the um, fear and anxiety. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah. Well, fear is generally thought to be apprehension about a known threatening object, and anxiety is apprehension that's more vague, not specifically related to a known object. So, of course, we have fear about the coronavirus. It is a known object. But identifying with it means that our whole way of being is now focused constantly on that one particular object. And we lose our connection to all the other dimensions of our life,
Hmm.
the things we enjoy doing, the things that are valuable to us, the things that we find coming into our minds when we're meditating or musing or in reverie, and all the other ways of being or living get lost. I think that's what Jung's mean by the paralysis that happens when we over identify or get completely taken over by the threatening object. Um, Anxiety, of course, has to do with encountering the unknown. And there are unknown aspects of this COVID-19. We don't know what its effect will be. We don't know how it affect us individually or in our families. We don't
Right.
know that. We don't know what the experience of illness would be like. But anxiety oftentimes comes from the belief that we ought to be able to control it all. And of course, that's not true. There's some things we can control, we can do, but life also requires us at times to surrender to the things that we can completely control.
Right.
And ironically, that usually lessens anxiety when we don't expect ourselves to do everything conceivable to keep something from happening.
Mm-hmm. I've talked with you about this concept that I am now using more and more in my trainings, and that is the idea that I bought for a long time, which is the power of choice. And it came from Viktor Frankl in his book, Man's Search for Meaning. Like, no matter what happens to you, you have the power to choose your response in any given set of circumstances. In fact, the quote, I pulled it out because I love this quote, and then I want to give the balance, the other side of it. So Frankl said, and from his experience in the death camps of Nazi Germany, and of course he was a psychiatrist from Vienna, he said, "We who lived in the concentration camps can remember the men who walked through their huts comforting others, giving away their last piece of bread. They may have been few in number, but they offer sufficient proof that everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. Your inner freedom, which determined whether or not you would become," and this is my favorite phrase, "whether or not you would become the plaything of circumstance." I love that, but I've come to see that that's one-sided. You've helped me see that that's one-sided. And I think the other side is the mystery of life unfolding and the billions of things that happen outside of Kathy thinks she's in charge. And that side, our very Western view of I'm going to seize the day, make it happen, take charge, is being challenged right now, which guess what? No, you're not. You're going to have to swing over here a little bit and let life unfold mysteriously outside of your control. And that tension of those two sides, it feels to me like they're the opposite sides of the same coin, and that we're having to tilt into the letting go side. The letting go side, I guess, is what I'd say. And so I don't know. It feels like what you're saying is ringing true for me, that my practice now is not get up and seize the day, Kathy. My practice now is let go and let this unfold and be more trusting, sort of having that sense of basic trust. Jung's term is what? The transcendent function, the inner drive, the inner thing that leads us, psyche, pulling us towards this wholeness. Maybe you could speak to that a little bit, but that's where I've sort of wrestled and come down to is my sense of the balance between those two.
Yeah, well, I think there is a balance between those two. It might be, the belief that I can change my own attitude, which is true. We can do a lot to affect our attitude. But it's true, at times we get attacked by or overwhelmed by certain feelings. I know myself, these days, I can occasionally feel a wave of anxiety. Something triggers that. Some worry about my family or something, like certainly, or a brother who's pretty vulnerable to this kind of thing.
Right.
And there'll be a wave of anxiety. But even without denying that, trying to bring in the other positive attitude. I'm doing what I can. He's doing what he can. We're doing as best we can. And that brings in a more positive, choosing that attitude with which to try to, it's not one of denial, but it is accepting limitation. We do as much as we can. It's kind of what the humility ultimately is. It's accepting the limitations in life, the limitations of our own capacity to control life. And ironically, keeping both in balance usually lessens the anxiety a bit.
Right. I think that's true. That was my other question. Any specific strategies or tips or suggestions for that you haven't yet touched on that sort of get to managing through this?
Well, I think even in the midst of this, we know what the negative factors are and what we're hoping to avoid, while being aware of those and allowing ourselves to have those feelings when they come. But I think also continuing to try to lean into life and be about the positive things we might actually find ourselves inclined to do, having more time for reflection, valuing that, and connecting maybe with people who are important to us that we normally having time enough to connect with,
Right.
writing or on the phone or video. I think engaging with the things that still have value for us and letting ourselves spend time with that. And I think certainly spending some time in personal reflection, whether one does that in a meditative way through mindfulness meditation, whether one does it maybe through yoga practice, whether one does it just through what we call quiet reverie, where I'm just being with myself and noticing the thoughts and the feelings that come up, the memories, the different facets of my life in the past, the present, that just come to my mind. It's a way in which I'm honoring all various elements of my life and my being. I think that can relativize a more singular focus on fear and anxiety. So I'd certainly recommend things like that. The other value, of course, I think you pointed before, and Jung points this toward the end of his Memories, Dreams, and Reflection. He makes this comment that the strongest energy in life, he ends up saying, is love. This sense of love and connection and compassion for others. That's the great irony now with all of this, that we're practicing distance, but maybe actually feeling closer to other people. And the experience of walking to the other day, and just to check the mail, nobody is here at the Young house. There's a woman standing off to the side from an apartment wearing a mask and gloves. And I think I'd seen her before, but we're about 15 feet apart. I see her at the same time. She's raised a hand and waved to each other. We've never done that before. I don't even, but there was some kind of her knowing me, my knowing her. We're all in this together, wishing each other the best. There was kind of a passionate connection that had never really happened before. I think that's happening much more. We see it in all the human service people, the health professionals, people working in the grocery stores. I think embracing and living into that compassionate sense of connection with other persons is what can give some meaning to us at this time. So allowing ourselves to be moved by our own compassionate feelings is a central compassion, part of getting through all of this.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So.
There's a quote that I'll explain a little bit because it might not make sense to people who don't know a little bit about Buddhism, but it's a quote by Chogyam Trungpa, who was a Tibetan Buddhist teacher, and he brought meditation practice to the West, really, and founded Naropa University in Colorado. But he said this beautiful, beautiful thing, which is, if you can hold the suffering of the world in the palm of your hand, and never forget the vastness of the great eastern sun, which is God, being, if you can hold the suffering of the world in the palm of your hand and never forget the vastness of the great eastern sun, then you can make a proper cup of tea. And I love that, because I think he's saying then you can truly be in this moment. You can truly be in this moment with an open heart, even though the heart that's open is maybe broken open. So I love that it gets to the idea of compassion. You're not denying the reality of the suffering, and yet you're also not denying the value of the great love that's the container for all, and sort of the divine force that's propping all of us up during this time. And so it doesn't deny either side. And I love that
Yeah, that's
quote.
right.
It's really provided a lot of support to me in this way.
Yeah.
Is there anything, we said we wanted to sort of keep ourselves to 30 minutes because of attention spans. Is
Yeah.
there anything else in closing, Dick, that you'd like to share before I provide some final comment?
Not much other than probably what you just said, and that is, I think what seems most worth recommending these days for all of us is the spirit of compassion toward ourselves and toward others as well. Feeling with our own limitations and also feeling with what other people are going through as well, because that's the energy that keeps us, in fact, all connected. And I think that's what Jung was saying, is that the things that come our way really have as their purpose, making us more aware of how interconnected we are and need to be. So to me, that seems like a central theme.
Yeah, thank you. And I just want to thank you again for taking the time to speak with me today. I know that it'll provide support to people in our community right now. And to everyone who is watching and listening, if you have suggestions for other people that we should interview and speak to, and I'm sure you're going to say, have Dick back. And so I will try to arm twist that again. But please connect with our community by going to our website, which is www.jungcentralohio.org. And you can reach us that way, and you can connect with us on Facebook and social media as well. So thanks again, Dick, and thanks to everybody who's tuned in today. And we'll try to have another one of these interviews posted in the next week or two. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, it could be great if people send in questions they have or thoughts that they have that they would like to discuss or have other people reflect on. That would be great. So.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. So thank you for that, and we'll try to work that into our next commentary. So thanks so much, everyone.
Okay, thank you.